In the heart of the mighty Roman Empire, beneath the shadow of grand arches and bustling forums, lived a world often overlooked by history, the world of a Roman child. What was it really like to grow up Roman? Forget the marble statues and epic battles for a moment. Let's journey back 2,000 years to discover the laughter, the tears, and the everyday reality of being a child in ancient Rome. Our story begins not in a palace, but in the crowded, noisy apartment blocks called insulae. For most Roman children, this was home. The air smelled of baking bread, wood smoke, and 1,000 other families living side by side. From the moment a Roman baby was born, their life was uncertain. The father, the paterfamilias, held absolute power. He would inspect the newborn, and only if he lifted the child from the ground was it officially accepted into the family. It was a harsh reality, a stark reminder that life was fragile. But for those accepted, childhood began. The first few years were a bubble of maternal care, filled with lullabies whispered in Latin and simple wooden toys. Imagine a toddler clutching a tiny carved animal or a rattling doll made of clay. These weren't just playthings. They were their first companions. They played games we'd recognize today, hide and seek among the pillars of a courtyard or rolling hoops down cobblestone streets. Their laughter would echo in the same way a child's laughter does now. Around the age of 7, the paths of boys and girls would dramatically split. For boys from families who could afford it, education began. They'd wake before dawn, guided by a slave carrying a lantern to the home of their teacher, the magister. There, in a small, often cramped room, they'd learn the basics: reading, writing on wax tablets, and arithmetic using an abacus. It was far from gentle. Lessons were learned by rote, and discipline was strict. The poet Horace remembered his teacher as the man of blows, a common experience for many Roman schoolboys. But this harsh schooling had a purpose. These boys were being forged into the future citizens of Rome, the administrators, soldiers, and orators who would one day govern the known world. They studied the great epics, memorizing tales of heroes like Aeneas and Romulus, learning what it meant to be Roman: duty, honor, and loyalty to the state. Meanwhile, what about the girls? Their classroom was the home. A Roman girl's education was entirely domestic. She learned from her mother how to spin wool, manage a household, and oversee slaves. Her destiny was not to conquer lands or sway senates, but to be a matrona, a respected wife and mother who would raise the next generation of Romans. While her brother was practicing rhetoric, she was mastering the loom, her future marriage already being planned. Life wasn't all work and no play, though. Children from all walks of life looked forward to the festivals. Events like the Saturnalia in December were a magical time. The strict social order was temporarily turned upside down, gifts were exchanged, and for a few precious days, children could feel a sense of freedom and pure joy. They would have played with nuts, a bit like playing marbles or simple board games scratched into stone steps. These moments of happiness were universal, a thread connecting their ancient world to ours. But as childhood neared its end, the responsibilities of adulthood loomed large. For a boy, the transition was marked by a special ceremony. Around the age of 16, he would dedicate his childhood toga, the toga praetexta with its purple border, to the household gods. He would put on the pure white toga of a man, the toga virilis. In a single day, he was no longer a boy. He was a citizen with all the duties that entailed. This was a day of immense pride for his family, a celebration of his entry into public life. For a girl, the end of childhood was even more abrupt and often came sooner. She might be married as young as 12 or 14. The night before her wedding, she would gather her childhood toys, her dolls, her hoops, and offer them to the gods. It was a poignant farewell to her youth. She was leaving her family home to start a new life, to run a new household, and to become a mother herself. Her identity would now be tied to her husband and her children. Of course, this was the experience of the privileged few. The vast majority of children in the Roman world were not citizens. They were the children of slaves, born into bondage. Their childhood, if they had one at all, was spent working. They had no rights, no education, and no hope of a ceremony to mark their coming of age. Their lives were dictated by the whims of their masters. It's a somber truth that the grandeur of Rome was built upon the backs of people, including countless children, who were denied the simple joys of being young. When we look at the faded portraits from Pompeii, or the tiny leather shoes found near Hadrian's Wall, we are looking at the ghosts of these Roman children. We see boys playing, their faces full of mischief. We see girls with elaborate hairstyles already looking like miniature women. These artifacts are not just objects, they are echoes of real lives. They remind us that behind the epic history of emperors and legions, there were millions of personal stories. Stories of first steps, favorite toys, scraped knees, and dreams for the future. So, the world of a Roman child was one of sharp contrasts, of love and severity, of privilege and hardship. It was a world that shaped them into the men and women who would sustain an empire for centuries. But at its heart, it was a world of children who, despite the vast differences in time and culture, played, learned, and grew up just as children always have. Their voices may be silent, but if we listen closely, we can still hear their whispers in the ruins of Rome. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this story moving, please like the video and subscribe for more dives into the hidden corners of history. See you next time.